Canada's economy could be about to crash. We are seeing things that you would normally see before a major economic downturn. Our unemployment is skyrocketing, rates are being cut, we are seeing a spike in people who are shoplifting because they're not able to feed themselves, and lifelong Canadians are living in tents. That's not good, but don't worry. Our finance minister, Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, and all of the other ministers keep telling us macroeconomically things are going great. They're lying to us, so much so that Canadians are now fleeing, trying to find other opportunities and other countries to move to that they think would be better than Canada. That's bad. Let's get into it.
University of Ottawa students are stressed by more than just the start of a new school year.
I've been looking for a job since January, and I didn't find a job, and I found a job in Montreal. That's why I went there.
International student Michael Ndua has his own theory on why unemployment continues to rise.
I think there is too many international students right now.
And many economists agree.
That's friendly fire.
The job market can't keep up with the rapid uptick in post-COVID immigration numbers. Despite adding 22,000 jobs in August, the overall unemployment rate jumped to 6.6%. Excluding the pandemic, it's the highest it's been since 2017, largely due to population growth of over 96,000 newcomers in August alone. Economic conditions hitting young people hardest. Under 25 employment is now double the general rate, its worst level in 12 years.
Those with lowest seniority in generally lower paying jobs, those are the people who are starting to feel the brunt of it.
A stark
96,000. Do the math on that. That's about 1.2 million. Crazy as it stands there. And then, of course, that 22,000 jobs number. Yeah, guess what? A lot of that was part-time, and a lot of that were public sector jobs, which again means not full-time work, which is not awesome, and then public sector, which is not economically productive.
Change from 2 years ago when unemployment was at its lowest level since the 60s, a worrying new trend showing signs the Canadian economy is slowing.
We've gone from a low unemployment rate environment to one where, we're starting to enter concerning territory.
Concerns also from the Bank of Canada. Increases to interest rates from the central bank have forced businesses to cut back on hiring or cut staff altogether, and they're worried persistent high immigration levels could continue to put pressure on the job market.
The Canadian economy is at a point where it's having trouble absorbing the number of workers.
That scenario is likely to give the Bank of Canada more cover to cut interest rates further, Carolyn, and with 2 more decisions set for this year, rates could start with a 3 just in time for Christmas.
They keep talking about that like that's a good thing, which it is, because a lot of people are struggling with payments. So we do want the rates to go down. Even me, I'm on a variable rate mortgage. I would love for rates to go down, but they do that based on things getting worse. So that's not a good sign. It's not usually something you want to see for the economy. And then, of course, like they said, we're not able to absorb these levels of immigration. Unemployment continues to get worse. But one thing that is not getting talked about enough, which they kind of did mention here, the big trend we are seeing is a major spike in layoffs. That's actually contributing to a lot of the job losses. It's not just the population growth without the jobs being there, it's actual layoffs. So, that's something that's worth noting as well. That's companies slowing down. That's people losing jobs, which means they're going to be spending less. It becomes a self-fulfilling circle because now people are getting laid off because the economy's not doing well. Well, then it continues to get worse. And what happens when people are not able to pay for things? They start turning to crime, which is why shoplifting is increasing in Canada. Let's get into it.
The crime of shoplifting appears to be spiraling out of control in Canada. Retailers are facing losses in the billions, with businesses considering closing down for good. SCTV's Paul Hollingsworth explains Nova Scotia has struggled the most with the surge.
The owner of this Halifax clothing store is not surprised shoplifting is on the rise in Nova Scotia, up 21% in 1 year.
I don't doubt it. I think in retail, that's a problem, always has been for the 52 years we've been open.
Based on population per 1,000 people, Nova Scotia has the highest rate of shoplifting out of all 10 Canadian provinces. Yukon has a higher rate, but with a much smaller population. Ross McNeil and his staff maintain a watchful eye for thieves on a daily basis.
That guy must be where Don Cherry gets his suits. Look at that thing. That's quite the suit. That being said, Nova Scotia has like silently, if you guys are from Nova Scotia, comment down below. I see a lot of people comment from Western Canada and from Ontario and stuff like that, but never seen anybody commenting from the East. They've silently been getting crushed out there, especially like comparatively to what their economy is, how much prices have gone up in housing and rent, which, you know, we'll get into in the next video. But it's just seeing that this store, which he said has been open for 52 years, which is now going to get pushed into like closing. You know, I guess Don Cherry retiring was a big hit.
They'll come in and try to grab something, go out the door.
Retail analyst Bruce Winder says in tough economic times, people sometimes grow desperate and shoplifting often increases.
Everything from, homeless rate to unemployment rate, you'd have to look at average income.
The problem has become so serious that the Nova Scotia Liquor Corporation has now pulled some products from the shelves, placing them in secure areas as a deterrent for would-be thieves.
Have you liked the video yet? If you haven't liked the video, it's a free way to support the channel, helps get these videos in front of more people so they know what's going on in Canada. If you like what we talk about here, feel free to subscribe. I'd love to have you on board. Back to the video.
If a store believes that are being taken more frequently than others, then they may make the choice to put it behind the shelf.
Theft has caused financial wreckage within the retail industry.
So, if you look in the United States, a number of big chains have actually closed stores.
Some store owners in Nova Scotia likely won't survive if shoplifting continues its upward trend.
That's always been a frustrating thing for me when people say like, oh, it's a big store, they've got insurance. Like, that's not how it works. Like, eventually it's not economically viable for the stores to stay there. They'll just leave. You end up with food deserts, less services. And speaking of, like, here's this story. It was PP who shared it, but this is a Nova Scotian woman who is now homeless. She's lived in Nova Scotia her whole life and can't afford to find a place to live.
In this tent lives 77-year-old Judy Howe with her 80-year-old partner George, a situation she never imagined to be in. She says they had an apartment in Halifax before the building was sold and to be torn down. After that, they went to Ontario to be with George's dying mother, but they couldn't afford to stay there and chose to return to Halifax.
It's not home. It's not a place you can cook a meal for yourself. You can take a shower. We go up to the Y on Park Street here. I always get lost trying to find my way out. And that's where we shower at. And you can go there every day if you want, And thank God they have that service. But it's not where I want to be. I go to bed crying at night. At night I go to bed crying and I pray to God, asking Him to get me out of here. I need to be out of here.
With the couple's deteriorating health, a volunteer street navigator is desperate to get them into affordable housing.
Judy is the age that my mom would be if she was still alive. And it breaks my heart to see that people who have been born and raised in Canada and Nova Scotia are now having to face this.
So think about that. This lady is 77 years old. She's living in a tent in the province she was born and raised in. Meanwhile, we are bringing over millions of immigrants who are getting government subsidies, all sorts of things, and then we are sending money overseas to other countries to help them out when we have 77 and 80-year-olds living in tents. It just goes to show why this last girl here, I'm going to link her channel down below because she does a lot of Canadian and travel content on, why she's leaving Canada, some of the countries she's looked at, some of this stuff. But she breaks it down here really succinctly, why she's leaving Canada.
The older you get, you can never go home again, especially if you travel as much as I do. Even though I was born in the Soviet Union and lived my first 5 years of life in Ukraine, it is very clear to me now that if any place has ever truly felt like home, it would have to be Canada. I moved to Canada with my mother and stepfather when I was 5 years old, and I grew up in a small town in rural Saskatchewan. I loved living there as a kid because I had so much space to roam around, my parents weren't afraid for my safety, and this was also the time before cell phones, so having a vivid imagination was absolutely necessary to keep yourself entertained. As I grew older and had some opportunities to travel, I began to discover just how big and diverse our world really was. I began to understand that staying long-term in my small town would not be the right choice for me, because by that point, that vivid imagination that I had developed in my youth was begging for more. More excitement, more opportunities, new people, and new places. And that's exactly what I got. The last 15 years have been full of adventures, lots of changes in my career, meeting thousands of new people from all walks of life, and also seen some pretty remote corners of the world with almost 50 countries traveled so far.
Counter argument, I'm not saying she did anything wrong. All I am saying is if you grew up in small town Saskatchewan and you had 15 years, where you were just spending time traveling, doing all this stuff, and you could have been, buying a house there 10 years ago or, building your life in small town Saskatchewan, you might have a bit more roots there and, you might own a home, stuff like that. So I'm not saying there's anything wrong with what she did, but
what has stayed the same amidst all of this change was Canada. I could always come home and feel like I was wrapped in a comfort blanket of stability. While chaos was going on elsewhere in the world, Canada felt like a breath of fresh air. It was never perfect, but I would still say that most people I knew had a relatively high quality of life. Most people who had middle-class jobs were able to afford their own home, have a couple of children, and take a vacation once or twice a year. Even when I was working part-time as a waitress to make ends meet while pursuing my creative endeavors, I don't really remember worrying that much about the cost of groceries or gas or finding a place to live. I never had to wait that long to see my family doctor, and finding that new family doctor was also super easy. Almost anywhere I went in the country, I felt relatively safe to walk the streets alone, even at night when I lived in downtown Toronto. So that is why it makes me extremely sad to see the state that Canada is in now. COVID was obviously a
So, yeah, with me making that point earlier of she could have stayed in her hometown and built a life there, I do think that is technically true, but she just brought up a bunch of good points there, which is also true. Like, you used to be able to make it work in Toronto 10 years ago, not even working some crazy high-paying job. You didn't need to make $200,000 a year. You could just be hanging out, working as a waitress, like she said, and make it work in Toronto. So, I do think things have objectively changed. I just don't remember being in a time when I knew people who couldn't get a family doctor. In my whole life, I've never known this many people who are struggling with groceries or all of these other things that she's talking about here. So she is right.
A huge turning point, not only for Canada, but all around the world. I was already running my channel full time at that point, so as soon as the travel restrictions for other countries lifted, I left for long periods of time because trying to run a business in Canada was extremely haphazard, and trying to survive on CERB wasn't nearly enough. When I did come home, I was extremely saddened by the poverty that began popping up all over the country, that people were struggling to afford basic necessities, and especially in the last few years, that absolute shacks of homes were selling for million-dollar price tags. Visiting British Columbia after they decriminalized drug use in an attempt to curb overdoses was also an eye-opening experience. I had been to Hastings Street over a decade ago, and it was pretty bad then, but nothing could have prepared me for what it looked like now, and the fact that all over the city, people were openly doing hard drugs. Sadly, I don't feel as safe as I used to in Canada, especially in the big cities. It makes me angry that our justice system has become so lax with putting criminals behind bars, especially with repeat offenders. I don't have a problem with...
We obviously talk a lot about economics on this channel, and a bit more of the numbers and get into those like facts, if you will. But a hard thing that's harder to quantify is safety and how people feel about that. I actually lived in Vancouver back in 2012 into 2013, and I lived in East Hastings. It was bad. There was always homeless people, but it is nothing like it is now. The safety has changed, So we can't put a number on that. It's hard, but like everywhere I go all the way across Canada. Like when I was a kid, we were outside playing all the time. Oh, streetlights are on. It's getting dark. Better go home. But it was always safe. Our crime and justice system is an absolute joke right now.
Paying a reasonable amount of taxes if that money is genuinely going towards the bettering of social services and keeping a safe and clean public environment. To be honest, I don't feel like Canadians' money is being well spent, especially over the past few years. And as someone who has barely utilized any social services in the past 5 years, I feel like I'm paying far more than I am receiving. So it is for these and many other reasons that I have decided to see what other places might be a better fit for me at this point in time. It's definitely not a goodbye forever, but an opportunity to see if another place might feel more like the home that I hold in my heart.
Speaking of better fit, if you're gonna leave, you might need a bigger suitcase, Alina. I'm gonna link her channel down below. She had a bunch of awesome videos. I haven't watched all of them. I actually just found her channel today. But thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and have a great rest of your day.